everybody, Joseph Rothschild here, aka MBT, and this holiday season I returned to my hometown in order to escape both the hustle and bustle of city life and the siren song of Yu-Gi-Oh! And then 10 minutes after I left, Konami released 18 new formats. So this week we're going to be doing a video series talking about each of these formats in detail. I'm going to give you the tools necessary to be competitive at these formats out of the starting gate. The first week your OTS is hosting these, you're going to show up, face exactly one casual and a 10-year-old child, and walk out of there with that sick single OTS pack. I imagine prizing for these is not going to be very good. So, today's video is about the format that I think the most people are hyped for because it is the least clearly broken, Common Charity. Now, what is Common Charity? Well, reading from the press release, for Common Charity format events, duelists need to build a deck using only common cards. This makes it equivalent to Magic's PAUPER format. This applies to all parts of the deck, the main deck, the side deck, and the extra deck, and it's similar to the Cast Party Pegasus Challenge format. Christ, that's a bad name. The only way it could have been worse is if it was the Ethno-State Pegasus Challenge format. But it restricts to common cards instead of allowing duelists to select the rarity of their deck. Unfortunately, that is all the information that we have. If you expected there to be a little more in-depth technicality, you obviously have not worked with Konami before. Now, we do get a little bit of insight as to the comparison to the Pegasus Cast Challenge format, which, if you're unfamiliar, was a format in which individual duelists could pick a rarity, common, rare, ultra, and then bling out their deck to exactly that rarity. This ended up being Common Charity about 90% of the time because it turns out that rare isn't a particularly expansive card pool. But according to the rules of that format, we learned two things. One, you cannot play a higher rarity version of a common card. So if you want to play Sangan at common, you gotta be playing the common Sangan. Leave your retro pack nonsense at home. I don't need to be reminded that you're richer than I am. And if you're playing dual terminal cards, they count as their base rarity. Now there's some other weirdness we really need guidance for. For example, there are some OTSs that are exclusive to individual regions that print good cards at common. We need to know if those cards are allowed in the format, and if so, if you need to track down like a foreign copy of an OTS single, but outside of that, it's pretty straightforward. So before I foist some decks on you that you can just steal, you filthy net deckers, let me talk to you a little bit about the philosophy of the format. Now, to play Common Charity, you're going to need to forget a significant amount of the lessons you have learned from playing Yu-Gi-Oh! See, right now, Yu-Gi-Oh! Often resembles a die roll, and then one player's attempt to play a 20-minute long setup turn that ends on enough omni-negates that the opponent can't possibly chew through them. This is not the case in Common Charity. You still have the same amount of starters and extenders, both of which have likely been reprinted to death, but you lack the finishers that set up those really powerful negation boards. There's no Apollosa, there's no Borreload Savage Dragon, there's nothing like that. And as a result, while you will be taking long combo turns, you'll usually be ending on unaffected by card effect boss monsters. It's a little less playing to out-negate your opponent, and a little more playing Towers Turbo. And Towers Turbo is a lot more fair when everyone has access to a Towers. It turns out there are a ton of decks that have low rarity bosses that are unaffected. Not only do these setups lack finishers, they're also a lot more risky. Not only is almost every good hand trap currently available in the format, almost every good trap card is as well. And in a format where you're spending your entire hand in order to make an unaffected boss monster, a well-timed Solemn Warning can end the game on the spot. The entire Solemn Suite, Torrential Tribute, and most hand traps are at your disposal. So decks that are resilient as well as explosive are going to be at a premium. So with that, let's talk about what's good. Now, some people from my Discord have set up a Common Charity Discord, and while the format is still largely unexplored, they have held a couple of tournaments that have had some pretty interesting results. So let's just start with the most powerful. Surprising no one, the best deck in the format, a combo-oriented strategy that ends on an unaffected monster. It's a name you all know. It ends in an I. Please put your hands together for Tenyi. That's right, many people expected Gouki to be the top dog in this format because of its appearances in the YugiTuber Grand Championship and Progression series, but it turns out that Tenyi is absolutely busted. Tenyi's normally used as an extension engine in Sword Soul in Advanced, but in Common Charity it gets to flex its own ultimate boss monster, and this guy, he's a house. Tenyi also has something that these other Build-A-Board decks don't, and that's additional plays. Anyone can build an unaffected boss monster, but Tenyi has the ability to change the stats on the boss monster, protect their normal monsters, bounce opponents' cards before they commit to a combo, and rebuild after those monsters are destroyed. And as a result, it is a resilient and interactive Towers Turbo deck, a sentence that I never thought would leave my mouth. Similarly powerful, a deck that occupied 2 slots in the top 4 of the most recent Common Charity tournament on this Discord was Lunalight. Lunalight's advantage over other decks that make a big unaffected monster is that their big unaffected monster attacks really well. It's actually quite frustrating putting together a Towers and using your whole hand to do so, only to eat a Kaiju and have no follow-up, and lack the pressure necessary in order to get your opponent out of the game as soon as it hits the field. For this reason, Lunalight is well positioned to be the most aggressive of these Towers Turbo strategies. I mean, have you read this guy? And then finally, what I think a lot of people expected would be Tier 0 moving into this format is Gouki. Now, it's no surprise why Gouki is on here. Gouki the Power Load Ogre is one of the most powerful cards in the history of time, unless your name is exactly Gage.
Damn, I lost another week!
Gouki has no difficulty barfing out 2 of these bad boys and a Codebreaker line as well, which can pop back row on its way to its ultimate boss monster. However, it's exceptionally one note. That's pretty much all the deck does. Make Power Load Ogre and hope that that's enough to win the game. There was only 1 player committed to Gouki in the most recent tournament this Discord fired, but they were out by round 2. It's a deck with a huge target on its head, and it lacks the resilience necessary to push through all the pieces of interaction that everyone else is packing. Now, building a huge unaffected bungus isn't the only thing you can accomplish in this format. There are a bunch of unexplored strategies that I think hold a lot of promise. Here's some of those. First up, and this shouldn't be particularly surprising, is Luna Kaiju. Now, Fairy Tail Luna is one of the most powerful cards ever printed, and thank goodness she was printed at Common. For that reason, you're able to slap down a Fairy Tail Luna, give your opponent a Kaiju, return it to your hand, and out their big unaffected idiot pretty much every turn. Now, this is complicated by a couple of things. Firstly, the Luna Kaiju deck has absolutely no offensive pressure to speak of. You pretty much have to have the highest attack Kaiju, Jizikuru, at any given time in order to possibly mount an offense against a deck that can make a Towers every turn. And second, there's only 3 legal Kaiju, so it's not outside the realm of possibility that a deck that loses to Kaiju would potentially board those 3 individual Kaiju and at least keep one after you activate the Luna by foolishing it from their deck. This means that they would have the ability to contest your Luna without having to commit additional resources to the board, and they could assure that something like a Suprex would be resolving. I think an early contender for the most powerful control deck of the format is, and Pain, get a clean pair of pants, because it's Volcanic! I know this is shocking. A lot of people have written Volcanic off as a meme because it's constantly being paraded around Yu-Gi-Oh! Twitter like it's 2014 and we're still asking what Pot of Greed does. But Volcanic is unironically very strong. It can play an exceptionally slow game with access to Torrential Tribute and all of the Solemn Brigade, and it has the ability to wipe the field anytime the main phase occurs by using cards like Blaze Accelerator Reload and Foolish Burial Goods, a tool it never had access to historically. This can absolutely devastate a Gouki board or a Tenyi board, though it does struggle a little bit against Lunalight boards, which frequently don't have to commit many monsters to the field before they fire off a Lunalight fusion. Cards like Rocket have also been reprinted at Common, so it's extremely consistent as well, but it still has the old Volcanic problem of just drawing all your scatter shots. And finally, one deck that I think warrants a little bit more exploration, but is definitely a contender for one of the top decks of the format, is Paleozoic. Now, I know what you're thinking. Joseph, you have no Totally Awesome. What on earth does Paleozoic go into? And the answer is, I don't know. And that's kind of where the deck is. The individual Paleo cards are extremely powerful. Oleanades, Dinomicious, some of the strongest removal tools in the game if you've been watching Chaos Draft, but they don't really have an exceptionally powerful payoff in the extra. Now, there's some weirdness you can do with the new Paleozoic Link monster. There are some interesting rank 2s that are at common rarity and might be a lot stronger in a format that lacks some of the negation tools that current TCG has, but it's a deck that's going to take some tinkering before we come up with a build that actually does something competent. And finally, here are some really promising archetypes that weren't able to capitalize on the cards that they have available in the most recent tournament. Phantom Knight has pretty much all of their main deck monsters. Megalith is completely playable at common rarity, and while Salamangreat is missing some key cards like Sunlight Wolf, it does have the ability to Cyburst link spam, which is often good enough on its own. So that's a quick and dirty introduction to Common Charity. This is a format that I think has a lot going for it. There's a ton of interesting decks, a ton of interesting styles of play represented, and no Omnis. I hope that Konami is willing to support this more than just a paragraph in a press release, and if so, I hope that you're able to take down some tournaments. Tune in next time, we'll be talking about the worst ones. I'm gonna kill these dogs.